everybody for jumping in and getting on this morning. Appreciate your service and your time to the coalition as a whole. And again, I don't think we said enough, but even to Marla and to the staff, thank you all for your work and helping to support the work of the coalition. You all have so much happening and going on that again, just thank you all for your time and attention to the work here that we do. Just jumping into our agenda this morning. Do also want to say to Ms. Morris, we're thinking of all of you all down there, keeping you all in our prayers as things continue to move forward there. And know things had to shift because of that. But again, thinking of folks not just here in Winston, but folks are facing some challenging times across the country, especially down there in New Orleans where you are. So again, thank you for taking the time to connect with us as well. So that kicks us off to our conversation this morning around the creation of a 10-year plan to create and preserve affordable housing. And so this first part, we're going to spend some time around a conversation of preparation and work for our time and commitment for October. With that, am I kicking it straight over to Ms. Morris or to you, Marla?
I think we can, just for the sake of time, because I know we have a couple of our members who need to sign off starting at around 11. So, and I think most of you have met Andrenika Morris, and I reached out to Andrenika because of the 10-year housing plan that the city of New Orleans has created, and I happen to have been still living in Louisiana at the time the work was initiated, and so just found the process to be more than anything, very inclusive, which I think is going to be a critical point for us. So just asked her if she could lend her knowledge and wisdom and advice on how we can get started, and even see how maybe in time there may be some technical assistance or some other kind of support that her organization may be able to provide us as we march down this path. But we knew that we just needed to get an understanding of how do we start, because I think that's the big question: how do we get started? And so, Joe?
Marla and Dora, before we just from last time, I guess did Paul Norby accept the vice chair's role, or
no?
Did that get reported on the last time? I'm sorry, I didn't know if we completed offices before Andrenika gets started.
I'm sorry, yeah, that should have been noted. So no, Paul was not able to, and Ryan was so gracious to take that
great.
role.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. Sorry.
All right, then. So I'll say without further ado, Andrenika Morris, Executive Director of Housing NOLA and Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance. All right, Andrenika, thank you.
No problem. And good morning, everybody. And I appreciate the kind words and the thoughts for what we're dealing with in New Orleans. You guys are not unfamiliar with dealing with weather events as well. And it is, but it's also, it's when Marla reached out, I was very much looking forward to being with you all in person. And when Marla reached out and said that we could change the date, and I know she said, well, I don't think you're going to be able to make it. It's like, no, I have to make it because this is important. And part of the reason that it's important, not just for you all, but it's also important for the work that is happening in Louisiana. We need more people, we need more communities to embrace this concept of moving to a place where we are trying to guarantee housing for all, particularly for the people who are the most vulnerable, the folks who are going to be impacted when there's a storm, when there's a wildfire, when there's a pandemic. And so it is very much a part of my everyday work to support you all in any way and encourage you all in any way that I can. So I'm happy to be here and excited for you all. So I've got an agenda that Marla and I worked out for our discussion today. And I'm here to play a facilitator role as well as answer questions and kind of guide you all through this so that you can start planning your big October convening. And hopefully I'll get to be there in October. Fingers crossed, fingers crossed. So you guys have already settled on the fact that you want to do a 10-year plan, and that's a big one. What's the horizon, right? And so the first thing that this group needs to do is start talking about the goals that you all want to utilize, right? And the goals that you want to have the work organized under. They don't have to, this does not have to be the be all end all. These don't have to be the only goals, but you do want to get started. And so give me 1 second. Marla, can I share my screen? And actually, I don't really want to share my screen. I want to use the whiteboard feature
Okay.
so that I can, let's see if that's working on this one. Actually, I think I can just share my screen, my PowerPoint, and let it, and I'll use it as like a working, I'll use it like a whiteboard. Hold on
Okay,
1 second.
and I'll try to find the whiteboard feature for future reference.
I meant to ask you about this the other day, but I said, well, I'm going to have my PowerPoint, so we can start there. And because what I want to share with you all the goals that we use in New Orleans, but I absolutely want to make sure that we're not so focused on housing NOLA, that these are ideas, right? And you all should see them as starting points. You may not like them. I will not be offended. and you should feel free to think about them just from that perspective as these are ideas, but that is what we'd like. The first thing I'd like you guys to do is talk about what are your goals and desired outcomes for this process, and we can get that down. And then working with Marla and her team, that can be distilled into proper goals, and then you guys can finalize them throughout the process. So, all right, here we go. Oh goodness, this is not. So many technical problems. 1 second, guys. So first of all, the number one goal inside of Housing NOLA that we use is preserve existing affordable housing and create more based on the needs. That's a fairly straightforward one. Is that one that you all think that you all want to agree to? And so, guys,
Can you say it again?
Preserving existing affordable housing and creating an adequate supply based on need.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's pretty succinct.
That's kind of top of line, obviously.
Yeah.
And fairly obvious. But we do want to go through this process and have the conversation with everybody. To Marla's point, yes, there are things that are going to be obvious, but they still need to be stated. They still need to be articulated. They still need to be properly shared. So, okay, so that everybody's okay with that, with being number one. Now we start talking about some of the other issues that pop up on how you get to these pieces. So number two for New Orleans is anti-displacement. So that's a worry that we've had. And I've read the enterprise report. I know it's a concern that you all have, but is it something that you want as a top of line goal, or is it something that could fall under your preservation strategy? It could fall under the production strategy. And again, these are for you guys to settle on. I'm throwing out ideas. And I'd also like to, before we share the third housing NOLA goal, I'd like to hear if there's anything that any of the members feel is pressing that need to be articulated as a goal.
Could you define what you mean in the context of anti-displacement, just so we're all speaking the same language?
Sure. So we don't like using the gentrification word, the G word, because because not everybody agrees with what gentrification means. There's a definition for gentrification, right? It's displacement. It's based on economic factors. But a lot of people confuse gentrification and revitalization, right? So revitalization is something that a lot of communities want. They've had historic disinvestment. They want their communities to have resources and amenities. And so a lot of people want revitalization. Revitalization becomes gentrification when those people who needed those resources can't stay there. They're pushed out. So instead of having the argument about revitalization versus gentrification, everybody agrees that people getting pushed out of their neighborhoods, forced out of their communities, either for economic reasons or for, because of climate change or because of environmental issues, is wrong. So that's how we use the term displacement. Oh, and Marla's saying that you already have an anti-displacement agenda. So again, it's whether or not do you want to fold that in to one of the another goal, or should it be a standalone goal on your own? And again, that's also a part of this conversation, right? If there's something that's already happening, does it need to be top of line goal? Or because there is this movement from your city council that you want to echo it. And again, these are questions, these are suggestions, and that's why I wanted to suggest 1 and 2, but then I also wanted to hear from you all. What did you think? What are other goals that you want to see and you'd like to see as priorities?
Well, Andrenika, on the anti-displacement, when you're just talking about, if knowing that from what Marla just said is that we have and I don't know what the policy is that the council adopted and what it does. I don't know what we have to gain to would either be reinforcing that as a great policy, or it would just be repeating what's already been decided. I don't know how the council. I don't know what went into enforcing that from their perspective, kind of thing. So whichever process gives it the most heft, if you would, or the most empowerment, is what I would suggest that we use as part of our goal setting.
Gotcha. And so one of the things that we're thinking about, Marla, you raised your hand.
Right. So the agenda that was adopted in June lists out a number of policy considerations for us to essentially implement that would kind of achieve that anti-displacement goal. And so part of the thinking when we actually competed for the opportunity to be in this in that initiative was that it could help inform an element of an overarching housing plan. So kind of to Andrenika's point, knowing that in a lot of our work in community, a lot of people have been using the G word, and we needed to be able to respond around how we are understanding the concerns and being proactive about addressing those concerns. And Paula was also a part of our team that went through this process. It was a 5-member team that included, of course, myself, Paula, Aaron King, who is the Director of Planning, James Perry, the Director of Urban League, and Mayor Pro Tem Dee Adams. So we were the Winston-Salem team that went through the initiative, and Grounded Solutions kind of helped pull all of that work together for us. But it was with the idea that whatever we ended up doing, our work had to be grounded in equity and making sure people weren't displaced.
I'm
sorry, Paula.
Marla, can we agree that based on the work that we did with Grounded Solutions, that Winston-Salem is really not dealing with gentrification to the extent that other communities are?
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the good things about our situation is that we aren't where people are, correct, as far, where it's as much of a crisis, which was the good thing, because we have the opportunity to build in some safeguards so that we don't have that crisis confront us. And we really kind of integrate some holistic and equitable policies on the front end. Would that be the proper way to say it, Paula?
Yes, Marla.
Okay.
I'd just throw out there that I'd say that I think it's meaningful, I think, to have some additional dialogue around that, because even though with that agenda and that framework, there's still, because of policy implications, there still is the lack of, in my opinion, teeth that this city can have without some additional policy shifts at a higher level, like at the state level and others, that actually gives municipalities a little more ability to even deal with the displacement thing. So I think it's worth having some additional conversation around that, because essentially the city would only be able to even impact that if it's, I guess, they have money in a deal or associated with something, and that's kind of restrictive. You have much more private development happening than you do public development. And so if you're looking at anti-displacement overall, how do you create that culture in the community where both public and private development are thinking about anti-displacement?
And the information, the agenda actually speaks of policy change at the local level as well as at the General Assembly level, at the state level. So it actually has some specific recommendations on certain types of policy changes that might help us get further down the road on this. Yeah, and so definitely, yeah, I think as a goal, you know, that is one of those things that we would have to walk through and work out, right?
Oops, sorry.
It sounds like it ought to be added, just back to Andrenika's question. It sounds like it wouldn't hurt to have it as one of our goals, to give it additional exposure and importance as far as that agenda that the council adopted in June or July, in June or whatever. So,
and so, yeah, and so you can, and I want to show you guys, I finally got this screen up the way that I wanted it to. One of the things that we were going to talk about is this process of reviewing previous plans and talking about what you guys have already. So you do have to do that, right? You do have to align ongoing efforts, and Mr. Crocker's exactly right. You want to make sure that you're not being duplicative, but it could be what level of relationship that you want to have with those other related efforts. It could be, oh, the city council's initiative is perfect and it's going to handle this. And to Derwin's point, it could be lacking in some teeth. It could be lacking in impact. And your role, this process role, is an honest assessment of those complementary initiatives to determine if it's actually going to work to meet your data goals, to meet your to meet the needs of the community. So we'll put displacement on as you know, it'll be on, and again, we can have as many as you want, and then you can start distilling them down or adding to them. So back to the question. Go ahead.
I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Would anti-displacement and tenant protection, would that be the same? Is that synonymous?
It can be, yes, exactly. And it's going to be up to you all to determine how deep you want these to go. That's right. So anti-displacement is absolutely, that's another reason why we use that term, because people think of gentrification more as things that happen to homeowners. And tenant protections, making sure that they can be long-term stable, is more easily gotten to through anti-displacement. And George, I see your hands up.
Yes, good morning. I had a question. I know initially, I think maybe a couple of meetings ago, we talked about defining just left my mind, but defining affordable housing. Thanks, Derwin. Yeah, defining what affordable housing was. And I don't know, Marla, if I missed it, I apologize, but I don't know if we ever circle back around to defining exactly what that was and what we were trying to accomplish around that. I know the HUD definition, you know, we said, but I didn't know if that's what this group was saying, that's what we were going to go with, the 30%.
We have not had that conversation, and what I'm looking for is the set of definitions that we had created and shared to see what we had in the glossary that we sent previously. And so I think what I'm looking at, I just pulled it up, we just have the term affordability, and then housing was in parentheses. And actually, a lot of these things were built on what came out of Louisiana. But under this affordability, I'm reading, it says a measure of how much of one's income one spends on housing, be it rental or mortgage payments. Housing is considered unaffordable if it costs more than 30% of the resident's income. So I think that's been kind of like a baseline definition that many have used. And so that's what we just included generally in our glossary of terms for the work that we do.
Sure.
But I think if there is some other measure by which we want to characterize it, obviously, that's up for discussion. I know, and this is something I mentioned to Derwin in an email the other day, how we talk about this work is going to be vitally important to bringing on supporters and minimizing the folks who are the NIMBYs, not in my backyard. And, a lot of the research I'm seeing, talks about, do we want to say affordability versus affordable housing, because from a practical perspective, and I may have said this once before, a 2x4 that's going to go into a market rate unit costs the same for an affordable unit. And so it's not the product, it's what is done to make it where it's affordable for an individual or a family. And so, do we get away from that term affordable housing? We talk about housing affordability, right? But the affordable housing, I think, is one of the things, that phrase is like a lightning rod. And so, I think as we progress in this work, coming up with an actual communication strategy, I think is going to also be very important. And I'll just kind of leave it there for right now.
And I would also echo, and Marla's hit dead on, I would also echo George with her, that not only do you all have to talk about defining it, you also have to, that's also a part of your data analysis. So you need to know what you're backing into, but you do not need to have that decision made today. And I would also encourage you all, because you wanted to do a comprehensive process, that this is going to be one of the hard things that I would recommend that you guys do with the larger group. And it's another, you all should be, your roles as in this coalition should be keeping the trains running on time, making sure things are done, making critical decisions. But this process will only be better if you slog through and these are going to be difficult conversations with the larger folks that the larger table that you're going to be setting, and saying, this is what affordable housing means in Winston-Salem. Right. And that it is something that everybody buys into, that the goals, and you're going to do that through consensus building. You're not going to do straight up and down votes. You're going, and which makes it even more painful. But it also makes sure that everyone is bought in and everyone saw the process, and that you all didn't come and say, this is what it means for affordable housing, and now we're going to help you, and that way people are not a part of it. But you're right, that is something that needs to be discussed, and I think it should be something you start talking about at your October meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And you all have some really good language already, and Marla and Marla absolutely got you to the right place, because how you communicate this plan to people so that they see themselves in it, and even if they don't see themselves in it, they still see the value in it. You've got to spend some time destigmatizing the concept of affordable housing. And so the language piece, and it really is community by community. I use the term destigmatize because I'm not sure if we can, you guys might be the exception. I'm not sure if there's a community out there that you could completely change the terminology and have people buy into it. But I do think that there is a process that allows people to understand it more deeply, and confront their racial bias. And then the new definition is the one that they buy into, as opposed to, because what's happening is they hear affordable housing and they hear a poor Black woman with too many children. And what your process needs to do is hear them say affordable housing or affordability, and they hear someone who, no matter what is going on, they could work, they could be retired, it doesn't matter. They can't, their housing costs are too high. And it shifts the blame, not from that individual, from that household, to society's failure to provide that opportunity for that family.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Andrenika, and I think that that dialogue does need to be had, because so many times, and we'll find that out, you know, in some development our church is involved in right now, affordability doesn't necessarily mean, you know, replacing housing for the same cost that someone has right now. As a matter of fact, that really is really below affordability, to be honest. I mean, it's just, so I think having that education and that kind of awareness in the community would be very helpful for any future development at all. You know, and particularly to encourage developers to get into that game even more than they may be, you know, incented to do now.
That's right. All right, so it seems like you guys you are committed to anti-displacement, even as it may be a subset, it may be its own goal, but you definitely want to keep that in. And so I'm going to ask again, were there any goals that you, as the coalition, anything that's pressing that you want to talk about? We want to share what we've done in New Orleans to give you a guidepost, but I also want to make sure that people's voices aren't being marginalized, right? And again, we're happy for you guys to take this document and rearrange, you know, the goals and all that stuff like that. But again, like I said, I want to give folks the chance to speak if they've got something pressing, if they had a thought that we haven't articulated yet.
If I could just offer something while others are thinking, and that is having the voices at the table, so the engagement of community. I think that's critical, just like how we talk about it is critical. I think having those voices heard, and I mean in a meaningful way, so that community can be a part owner of this plan. And so how do we make that a central part of what we do, or a goal, but that's just something I'd like to offer.
I don't know how that's articulated, Marla, but I agree with you as far as, you know, the voices, and I don't know if that gets into the work, or if that needs to be listed as a goal. But I also I was thinking as far as goals, that somehow we need to have a system, or, you know, the data collection, some mention of ways to collect, you know, the accurate information regarding affordable housing and the needs. And I mean, we always refer people to various websites or various studies and various, you know, collections of data kind of thing, but there has to be, or there should be, I won't say has to be, but there should be some way of developing a system of quantifying affordable housing and keeping that on a running basis, as opposed to having to recreate it every time, you know, something comes up. I don't know how that's said.
Joe, I want to drill down a little, because you said two things, and I just want to make sure, and I think you're I want to make sure I understand you correctly. You're talking about tracking available housing,
right.
And goals, I mean, what's being built, what's coming online, and then also making sure that that's something that's communicated to the general public, so people who are in need can find it.
Right.
So that would be called housing navigation services.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's what we would want to call that, because that's all encompassing, right? It's that assessment, the support that people need, because you need to know what it is, and it's something that not many communities have, right? And so it's definitely something that is a struggle. It is a struggle.
Yeah. Well, you've got the term out there. That's exactly what I was talking about, Andrenika, so thank you.
But why is it a struggle, Andrenika? Just so we can kind of understand how we might need to get ourselves situated.
Yes, one of the struggles is that number one, the failure to prioritize housing, right? So, and you've got a lot of competing initiatives already. You've got 211. You guys have 211 up there? Yeah, so they so either United Way or some other supportive services.
I think we do. I think we have 211 through United Way or through the.
Right, people call and
we do have 211. Yeah.
Yeah, people call and get help. Then you have your realtors, right, who prize themselves on being, oh, you need to contact us to help find housing. And again, that's at the extreme end, right? And so, but everybody else in the middle, it depends on what your housing system looks like. And a good test of that is all of you on this call, think for a second, no matter what your housing situation is now, what would happen if you had to find housing today, right? How would you go about that? Would you look in the newspaper? Is there a website that you are aware of? What do you tell staff? What do you tell people who are moving to Winston-Salem? What do you tell friends when they're trying to find housing? And so that gives you an idea of how complicated the existing housing navigation system is. In some places, in much of Louisiana, there is no formal system, right? It is very much class-based. If you're not from New Orleans, you will look in certain websites because you've been told by other transplants to look there. If you're local, you're told to look in this newspaper. If you're low to moderate income, you're told to drive around and try and find signs in a neighborhood that you want. So there's not a formal system anywhere. And we need one. This is the reason I have that term, Joe, is we came to the realization about 3 years ago that we needed housing navigation services for the entire state. And so it's very difficult because you have these people standing in these places already, and community. And I'm so glad you guys brought this up early on in your process, because it's also something that community is confused about, right? That's why I asked you all to think for a second what you would do or what you would tell someone to do to find housing. And if all of you are going, I don't really know, I'm not really sure. I might call X person, then you guys you don't have much of an infrastructure already. You need to, and so I would love to hear from you all. What would some of you do if you had to find housing today? And I don't mean emergency housing. I mean, I want to move and I want to rent, right? So where would you look? Where would you go?
Zillow.
You go to Zillow.
So Andrenika, I work for the apartment association, and people.
John, so you have inside information, John.
What's that?
You have inside information.
Well, but they assume that we do that, and we actually don't. And so we get a lot of calls from consumers, and we refer them to. There used to be 5 or 6 companies that you could go look for apartments to rent, and now they've all been bought by CoStar. So there's one company, and you said not emergency situation, but I wanted to give everybody what I run into all the time when there's a fire. And this is another way to think about it. When there's a fire and that you instantly need to find housing for, say, 20 families, there's no easy way to find a comparable housing situation by cost, by location to public transportation, by any other number of factors. We had a senior apartment community, so it was 55 and over community, and they lost a whole building. This is about 10 years ago, and we're trying to find housing for them. Well, there's no easy way to do that. So, yeah, it's a very complicated, and in the best of times, it's complicated. And right now, it's really bad because, Derwin said Zillow. Well, good luck finding anything on Zillow that lasts for more than a day right now.
Right.
So yeah.
So this is and again, it's something that folks, and you hit it right dead on, John. The community, the citizenry are until they have to deal with it personally, everyone assumes that there's something in place.
Right.
And most communities don't have anything in place.
Right.
So no, this is definitely something that you guys would want to lift up. And it could shift under another goal, but it also could be its own because you're trying to guarantee housing that, and so you want to have that be top of mind. Anybody else? Go ahead, Derwin.
No, just add to that piece, and that we do have, and it may be a place to at least glean information from, is that the housing navigator actually exists in the community now, but only at least for where I'm aware of it, on the very low end in terms of within the continuum of care housing spaces for homelessness, that you do have folks who are working that area every day trying to figure out where can we get and move folks who are in this space into housing. But I'm not aware of that existing beyond the continuum of care type of space.
Right. That's right. So that's the other piece. And again, what I
and even
found,
that's not as robust as it should be. So
that's right. They're dealing with people who have, instead of there being a large list, a comprehensive, well-documented list of all of the properties in Winston-Salem that are available at any moment. Instead, what they are dealing with are people who have volunteered to work with the most difficult cases, which limits them, because if there was this comprehensive list, again, those case managers can advocate for their clients and say, listen, I'm going to be working with this person. They're going to come and live in your apartment, and you're going to call me if there's a problem. And you should trust, and it breaks down the barriers for that kind of housing. So only the housing navigation services only exist for the most vulnerable, actually prejudices people to the concept of housing navigation services. And despite the fact that most people don't recognize that they don't know how to do it, they do need help doing it. And
another part.
Donna, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just wanted to weigh in because I actually faced this 3 years ago when I moved to Winston-Salem. I was living in Greensboro and commuting back and forth, and I was actually looking to purchase, and being in a position to be able to purchase, and not so much having a major barrier as income is concerned. It was still challenging for me, and I basically had Zillow. I heard you say Zillow, Derwin, but it was inaccurate. It was not up to date. Every location that I went to had already been rented, or not rented, had already been purchased. So even if we are looking at navigation system, it has to be up to date currently.
Right.
Changing daily. So whoever is on that list has to report back when the property have been sold or rented, so that people have a place to go to that is a reliable source. So that made the difference. And my home purchase came through one of my board members, referring me to his realtor. So, everybody didn't have that access to a board member or a person that has that type of information. So this is awesome. This is some good feedback.
Mm-hmm. All right, good. Does anybody else have another goal, another suggestion that they want to put on the preliminary goal list?
I have one, and I'm not sure if it's a goal. Paula, you can go ahead, Paula.
Well, mine is, we're working with neighborhoods who want to maintain or sustain their neighborhoods. They want to maintain home ownership in those neighborhoods, keep them safe. And so if we can, somehow create a goal to create safe and sustainable neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're talking about, I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. You're talking about making sure that those neighborhoods have the right amenities and resources inside of them.
Yes.
Not simply preserving them in amber so no one can move in, but you're talking about making sure that the neighborhoods are healthy.
Oh, making sure they're healthy, making sure they're safe, and making sure that they are, maintain the integrity and characteristics of that neighborhood in the way that it was built,
So I want to drill down on that a little bit, because I will be frank that some of the language is a little concerning, and I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, that I'm not presuming because of my own bias, right?
Okay. Well, let me just speak directly to what this neighborhood is wanting. They want to maintain home ownership in their neighborhood. They, it's not that they are anti-renters, but their homes, investors are coming in purchasing housing and turning it into rental housing, where this was once all the houses were homeowners. And so they would like to maintain it because it maintains some characteristics and integrity of that neighborhood. If that makes sense, but.
So yeah, no, I understand that. So, but the couple of the questions is, and this is kind of the thing that I would recommend that you guys talk about grappling with. So the first question is, what are the number points on that? Are those investments actually changing the home ownership demographics? And so you've got to start with the facts. This is something that we grapple with here as well, right? And so people are worried about, I actually had this conversation with one of our community leaders where he exclaimed that they are being deluged with rental units. And the deluge is 200 units in a community with about 10,000 people, 10,000 units, and it's 200 new rental units. That's not a deluge.
Okay.
And so there's a nervousness around it, but the first thing is, and it doesn't mean that the underlying point of preservation of characteristics and quality neighborhood values isn't important. But one of the things I want to caution against is blaming renters for that. You talk about the investors. You can talk about predatory investors, and you can talk about standards. But again, what is actually happening inside of the neighborhood is an important conversation to have. Mm-hmm. And making sure community members are not overreacting to changes, and again, blaming renters, because I will be frank too, people whenever people say they don't dislike renters, most people who don't dislike renters don't have to say that, and the fact that they're saying it means that they have probably said something somewhere else that would lead you to believe that they don't actually like renters and they don't want renters in their neighborhood, particularly poor Black renters. So
Nola.
there's a way. I have a suggestion that is going to get at what you are talking about. The overarching goal, and I think this is something that you guys have to grapple with as well. There's everything that you said, Paula. Top level makes sense, but you also went deeper, and I'm so appreciative for you bringing that up, because it is something that has to be addressed, and it doesn't mean they're dismissed or marginalized or ignored. You have to have the hard conversation, and the facts are going to help you have the hard conversation. And there are also there could be very much so predatory developers who are bad actors inside of their neighborhoods, and that is what you talk about. But I want to make sure that that nobody has to explain that this process is engendering. Nobody has to explain that this process doesn't like renters. It is going to be clear in your language that what you're talking about are powerful people who are preying on neighborhoods and really using renters, not people trying to keep their neighborhoods exactly as they are. Because that also, and that's another conversation you got to have with community, because these neighborhoods are going to change. The community should be talking about how they're going to change, not fighting so hard to not change them, because that's a losing battle ultimately. Not because I say so, but because that's how the world works. The pandemic, the next disaster that hits Winston-Salem, these are things that are going to change your community. And so citizens have to be ready to deal with those changes and be able to, feel like they have control, actually have control.
Well, this is a neighborhood that used to have about 250 plus homeowners, all homeowners. I think over the last 2 years, they had about 23 vacant houses that investors came in and purchased. I think they have purchased all of them except about 9. The residents would love to purchase those themselves and return them to home ownership. And not to say that the investors aren't selling them to homeowners. I think some of them have been sold to homeowners. But I think the residents are fearful that renters could turn their neighborhood into something that that's unfamiliar to them.
Yeah, I like
Question, Paula? Can I ask you a question, Paula? What you, because I hear you and I cringe a little bit at that, just for me, just in terms of from my approach, just because I have heard both sides of it from neighbors fearful of renters, but then also just to drill in the question of what you're hearing from the folks in that neighborhood. Is it more so a question of the aesthetic of the property, how the property is maintained, who keeps it up, how it's maintained? Or are you hearing folks talk about the people themselves? Because I think those are two different issues or two different conversations. If you're talking about the property, then it goes to, I think, Andrenika's point of predatory investors. They have a responsibility to care for the property. If you're talking about the people, then that's a whole nother conversation that I don't know we got time to deep dive into today, but I think it's a whole nother conversation around people's thoughts of the people. Do you know which one, or do you get a feel of which one folks are talking about?
My feeling is that they're talking about people who are not maintaining their homes or the aesthetics, not cutting the grass, keeping debris or something outside of the house in the yards, things like that is what I'm hearing.
Paula,
But what I'm hearing is that we want to maintain home ownership. We like to turn these renters into homeowners. You know?
Well, and the real reason I asked that question is that at some point in time, for most people, somebody's been a renter. You've been a renter at some point in your life. And most people, if you reflect on yourself, you probably don't think you were a bad renter. But so I think it's, and I don't know if that's a goal that we have or how we frame it in there. But to the point that you're making, Paula, I think is important that you got to honor how folks are feeling. So how do we make sure that that conversation is that we place away when we're engaging community, that we have to honor that there are people in neighborhoods who have that feeling and emotion. How do we make sure that that space is created for them to be able to clearly articulate that? But then also, how do we make sure we're also framing conversation that helps folks understand, like, what are root causes of that? So we're talking about poor maintenance of the house, poor maintenance of the property. How is it that whether you're a homeowner or you're an investor, why is it that you don't have to maintain your property? What are the rules? What are the rules and regulations around maintenance and upkeep of your property? And is that something that needs to be reevaluated as much as it is the fear of renter? Because I think that's a quirk in the conversation that you got to have. You got to honor folks feel the way they feel, but then how do we make sure we're framing conversation to kind of tease out the real issues so that we can then move to what needs to change in that process for folks, so that we don't get caught into the kind of round robin of just how folks are feeling, but more so get to the point of what's the causation of the issue.
What do you guys think about what
I like the way that you're framing that in number 4.
Yeah.
While preserving neighborhood character, while enforcing and promoting fair housing policy, right? It is the blend. You want to improve quality of life and preserve neighborhood character while making sure that you are not inadvertently promoting bias.
Yeah,
like that.
And then John and Marla had their hands up.
Yeah. Thank you, Derwin.
Okay. Well, 2 things really quickly, and thanks. I really appreciate this conversation. And I know this is one of many that we'll have with all of these when we get out into the community, because I know that's a big one, but kind of like Derwin mentioned, whenever I hear that about renters, I feel a pain in my heart because I'm a renter. I rent a house, right? 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. I maintain my yard. I plant flowers. So when I hear people talk about renters, that hurts, because I invest. You drive by my house, you wouldn't know I'm a renter. So we have to really kind of unpack what that means when people say that. So, I mean, the conversation has been rich and I appreciate it. And I know we're going to have to be ready for these conversations when we go out and start engaging community, because it's going to get very intense at times, I suspect. But I just wanted to just lift up the fact that I think this is really rich, and we also see, just in terms of how we're engaging, that we've got our work cut out for us. So I'll just pause there because I know Joe and John have some comments as well.
Well, John's had his hand up the longest, so we're going to Joe.
That's all right. Well, Marla, I appreciate you saying that. As you guys can imagine, I run into this. I represent rental housing providers, so I run into this all the time. And renters are the only people where it's, or some of the only people where it's still socially acceptable to say those people. You know, we don't want those people being renters, right? So it's kind of code. I don't want to keep digging into that. We've already covered a lot of great ground. The larger point I wanted to bring up that I think we need to think about with all of these discussions is the law of unintended consequences. So say you were to try to come up with a policy that quote unquote protects a neighborhood and to try to prevent it from becoming a rental heavy neighborhood, you are actually in danger of infringing on some of those owners' property rights. So those same owners who want to preserve their neighborhood, when the time comes for them to retire or for them to leave, say they want to move out of town, and the best offer that comes to them is from an investor that wants to invest in that property, and that could improve the rest of their lives or allow them to move to another town that they want to move to be closer to family, whatever those. Out of those 200 homes, there are going to be 200 various situations. All of a sudden, they become harmed by that same policy that they were really supporting. So when we come up with these things, we do need to think about the other side of the equation and always keep in mind. And believe me, I live in a neighborhood that wants to limit the ability of people. There's an HOA here, and so they want to limit. You know, they can limit things. And I keep pointing out to them that, that's fine until the day that you want to do some of these things, like rent your house because you can't sell it for whatever reason. So, I just wanted to point that out. I mean, there are other considerations that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And wealth building, that's one of the long-term goals. I think what ends up happening a lot of times in those kinds of communities that Paul is talking about, first of all, those folks have been marginalized. They were marginalized historically, right? They've fought hard to get their piece of the American dream, and they haven't had the chance for it to turn into wealth building through a generational prospect. Because that's the thing, right? That's where you start having these hard conversations. Mom and dad, we inherited mom and daddy's house, grandma's house. I don't want to live in it because it worked. We were stable. I went to college. I got a good job. I was able to buy or rent my own home that I'm quite comfortable in. And I want mom and daddy's house to be income generating for me. And that is, that's part of the long term. But so many people have not, because of displacement efforts, because of bad policies, a lot of those folks have not been able to achieve that, right? And so they're very worried about, can they get to that place? Can they get to the place where this is generational? And that's the concern that Paul is articulating at its core, right? Because in order for it to be generational wealth building, they actually have to die with it having value. and it not being them being able to rehab it and keep it up and it modestly appreciate, and then it can be passed on to the kids. So that is at the heart of their concern, that this has not worked for them or their family previously. And what we want to make sure is that they don't unintentionally stop other people from achieving the American dream, and also, frankly, like you said, doing things that will actually make that not a wealth building asset for that family in the next term. And I think we've got it. You guys have worked through this and gotten to a place that the devil's going to be in the details, because these are the broad top line goals. When you start looking at those policies, and that's where the data comes in, right? The data kind of helps you do that. Does anybody else have any other goals, anything else that they wanted to share, Joe?
Well, I don't have a goal. I wanted to comment on the one that we're talking about. And I want us to be careful as a coalition and putting these goals together of what can be done around them. On number 4, and while I understand and fully, agree with what Paula is concerned about and what she wants to get accomplished with that, and when you start talking about improving quality of life and preserving neighborhood character, I understand and fully, grasp the enforcing and promoting fair housing policies, which is something concrete that we can do, the city can do, enforcement can do. But I think it's going to be difficult for us to do some things around improving quality of life, as broad as that is, and with as much as that entails, as a goal for this coalition. So I don't want us to put on some goals that we know we can't enforce or we can't implement or we can't do anything about from an enforcement standpoint. You can't. I mean, I just want to make sure that we are careful about the goals that we set as a coalition and what we can do about them. Because the investor thing, that's happening all over Winston-Salem, and as long as land is as scarce as it is, and particularly close to downtown, I'm familiar right now with the community, just right outside of proper downtown that's going through the very same thing as far as investors buying up houses and maybe not renting them back or not selling them to those that are in that community, as a matter of fact. But I don't know how you legislate that. I don't know how you set a rule against that.
I want to assure you, Joe, that you can. Now, it is not going to be as black and white as some might like. It's going to be very nuanced, and there's going to be compromise, right? There's going to be, you're not going to be able to do it across the board all the time. And again, it's got to be driven by the needs of the people of Winston-Salem. And it can't be these knee-jerk reactions. I'll give you a good example of an initiative that no one on this call has mentioned yet. So you guys might be okay. Short-term rentals, Airbnb, right? You talk to the average affordable housing advocate, the Airbnbs are the worst thing that ever happened, and they should be, run out of town on rails. They should be taken outside and beaten. All the things. And then the other people on the other side, whether it's Airbnb does a really great job of marketing themselves. I don't have to defend them, right? But it seems like it is very black and white, right? That you either need to completely disallow it, which is almost impossible, or you need to just let it be unfettered and you can't put any regulatory controls on it. And that's a false narrative. It's a false choice. Yeah. There is something in the middle. And what I'm always going to push you guys to do is to find the compromise that works best for the people of Winston-Salem. That you guys are already ready to do that. I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to always tell you that, no, you all can find that compromise. And the compromise might not be down the middle, right? It might be something that leans more to one direction. But it will absolutely be nuanced. And I will always tell you whether or not something is possible based on my experience. Okay. And most of the time, there is a nuanced, strategic set of recommendations that can get you to where you want to be. And but it's very rarely the only answer to the solution. You're going to have to make some decisions.
Right. Well,
yeah. That's the big message is do not despair. It's hard, but there are examples. There are people who've done it before. There are going to be things that you all are going to trailblaze on. And because other people haven't thought about it yet. And that's the opportunity that you guys have.
Yeah, I understand. Every time I hear improved quality of life, that's a huge one. So you just don't know how that's defined. Just like we had that conversation around affordability, you just don't know where that starts and stops.
Right, that's right. And again, these are high level goals. When you guys dig down into the meat of it, you guys have seen our action plan. It is incredibly comprehensive. And we were very generous with ourselves, where we said one of the initial goals that we put together was that wasn't the language we used, but in essence we said we need to figure out energy efficiency for rehabs, right? Anybody who's ever done a rehab in the South will tell you how hard it is to do it, and then you want to put energy and efficiency on top of it. And we didn't kill ourselves and say, we have to figure this out right now. We're like, no, we're going to figure this out in a few years. But we're going to put on here the action plan under the larger goal was figure out energy efficiency for rehabs. And the language was that straightforward and clear. It was a little more flowery than that, but that's what it boiled down to, that we got 10 years to figure this out. We need to figure this out. And sometimes that's going to be what happens, is that you're going to just write down, this is a parking lot issue that we have to come back to. So I know we are over time. Some people have to leave. And so I do want to be quick and talk to you guys about two other goals that you guys haven't included that we include inside of ours, sustainable design and infrastructure, and special needs, addressing the needs of special needs populations. If those are things that you guys would want to look at. And then there's another goal that's not on here, which is, and we're gonna add anyway, it's how that goal is gonna roll us into the next conversation that I'm gonna take you through very quickly, because I know some folks have to leave. But yeah, sustainability, do you guys wanna consider including that in infrastructure? And again, Joe, that could also help people get to the quality of life piece, because that may be where you start quantifying that a little bit better, right? I mean, you don't want to have a conversation about potholes, but you do want to have a conversation about, I don't know, what do you guys have? Y'all don't have flooding, but y'all have, y'all do get hit by hurricanes. And so you want to talk about resistance to wind and that kind of thing, and energy efficiency, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to make in terms of, well, two things. I dropped in the comment section just around innovative in our language, and I know Marla said something about sustainability too, but just in the sense of when I said innovative, that's using that somewhere, maybe it's within there, just in the sense of when we approach the conversation that we're intentional about looking beyond what we're already doing. Because sometimes I think you can be guilty of trying to find the answer in what you've already done. So how do we make sure that we do look outside, that we are open to different tools, and to the sustainability component? I think that's true, especially if we have a conversation with folks on the lower end, and even folks who are in the middle spaces, that from the design of housing or apartments in general, you can help reduce, total, energy costs and that thing. So I think that's that goes into cost of housing, period. So if I can reduce my utility bill, maybe I can afford an extra $100 on the rent.
That's right.
If I could just interject really quickly, because I want to make sure we have a chance to do this before Joe has to leave, and that is our date for October, because I want to make sure we have everybody able to be at the table. I think, Andrenika, can you correct me? Were we talking about the 15th?
I'm looking at my schedule really quick. Yes, we talked about the 15th.
The 15th. So
15th and the 16th, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the 16th would be the kind of community.
Right. Well, coming the 14th and the 15th all day, and the 16th.
I think I had already indicated that I've got a conflict on the 15th, actually the 14th, 15th, and 16th. So I won't be there, but that's particularly at a morning session kind of thing. So I'm just going to be out of town for that one, or out of pocket, not out of town. Excuse me.
Okay. And I know, you've had some good insights and interactions. So that's why I wanted to float this now in the event we could potentially look at another date to kind of increase the odds of more of us being here. So I guess I'll ask Andrenika, is there any possibility for the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd?
Not the 21st and 22nd and 23rd, unfortunately. I've got that week is I'm gonna be in DC, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
That week.
Thank you, Marla. I appreciate your concern. If everybody can do it when you're currently scheduled, I mean, go ahead and keep it there. I mean, I'm sorry that I've got a conflict, but I think if the majority of the group can make it, we need to go ahead and proceed with it so we don't get too long in getting something put together.
Sounds good.
Joe, and I was gonna say, Joe, is that the whole day, or would you be able to pop in?
No, it's the whole day, Derwin. Excuse me.
Okay.
It's the whole day.
Okay.
Well, we could talk about talking with Joe before and making sure that we could bring his vision into the space.
That works. Are you open to that, Joe, having a conversation?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Anything I can do to help. I just know that I'm out of pocket, like I said, the 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th, those 4 days. So.
Okay, so we'll just make a point of maybe touching base with you beforehand to bring.
I'd be happy to give you my input. Yeah.
Okay, that'll work. Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
Okay. So, and then we also had one of the high level goals was around special needs population and making sure that accessibility is for them. When the logic there is when these are folks, people with disabilities, the homeless, and we also went through a process where we also set other special needs populations. So typically you use the protected classes, right? So people with disabilities, the homeless, veterans, there's a regular list, but we went through a community process where we asked through our planning process, is there anyone else that we're missing? And again, that special needs population are folks who there's a problem, and for whatever the problem is, it's worse for them, right? Housing crisis, it's worse for them. COVID, it's worse for them. And so that may not, and so like in New Orleans, for example, we added culture bearers, the artisans who make New Orleans, as well as the formerly incarcerated, given the fact that Louisiana is the incarceration capital of the world. There was a reason for us to add those folks because we have far too many people involved in that. But so, and so those are the kind of people that the community, that our process added. And so if you guys, I see everybody nodding, that they want to include this, but I also want to suggest that you also think about any other populations that you would want to add that people don't think about.
And I'd throw out there, and I don't know if it's in the special needs population, how we categorize it in there, included, but and I know that the council just recently added it to the updated discrimination policy, and that is income in terms of source of income.
Yep.
I know me and John have had some conversation about that, but I bring it up because dealing with a family that we support at the church right now who has a voucher, and the apartment, the space she's in now, they're no longer going to be supporting vouchers. So now her and her 4 kids have got to figure out where can they find a place that is going to accept the voucher.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay.
It's also one of those things that we could lift up at the state level as well, right? In terms of state policy. I know you and I had a conversation about that a couple of years ago, source of income discrimination. So yeah, right. it's a huge problem here.
And I'll throw in from the industry side, I think where we could get some collaboration between the two sides, because the source of income is a sore point with them, is on the idea of reform of the program so that it's less owned. There's one of the real disincentives is how complicated that program can be for landlords. And
that's right.
And what Derwin and I have talked about in the past is right now you're in a situation where there's so little housing available that if a landlord has to choose between a regular market rent process and an affordable housing process or a program, they're going to go with the more straightforward. It's a lot less onerous to them. So, but the population I thought of, I don't know how much we deal with it. I don't get as many calls about this in Winston as I do in Greensboro, but it is definitely out there. Refugees. They have a very distinct set of issues that we're dealing with. So that's, and again, for whatever reason, I get a lot of calls about that in Greensboro, but I have to believe we have that here in Winston too.
Okay. And that's something that, we should definitely look at. People who speak English as a second language is also an issue that's also going to be something you guys might end up having to push Marla and her team about, making sure that not just Marla and her team, but all of the entities dealing with folks who do not speak English as a primary language is something that a lot of the housing agencies struggle with. So yes. And also to your point, John, you also want to talk one other one I want to suggest, that, like I said, that gets us to our next conversation, is your strategic goals, right? And so it's going to be easy, not easy, I'm sorry. And then really some of it, I'm sorry, I'm crossing myself up here. It depends on how you line it up. The part that you were lifting up about making sure that the systems are working correctly could live under goal number 1, or it could live under strategic goals, because it's very easy. And again, this is going to be a hard part of the conversation. Just like we want to have hard conversations with community. Everybody can, like Marla talked about NIMBYism, and these are the external barriers to the work. But you all are going to also have to challenge your public sector partners, your Office of Community Development, your Housing Authority, your Housing Finance Agency, on cutting through the red tape. And from everything to how they administer disaster resources, to putting out tax credits, to putting out NOFA and CDBG dollars, to how your housing authority manages its vouchers, contribute to the problem. And so you can't do all of this work with community, you can't do all this work with private sector, and still have the public sector partners that kind of going, well, we're government. You really want us to be good at this? And the good part about somebody like Marla is that Marla's already there, right? So, but there are other actors who are going to need to get there, who are going to need to get better at their jobs. And John, you started to talk about it, right? I can cite you chapter and verse on how a lot of reluctance of a lot of housing, source of income discrimination is rooted in classic bias. But one of the reasons it's accepted is 9 times out of 10, you can point to the housing authority and convincingly make an argument that it is a bit of a freak show. And so you can't ever have the bias conversation with the landlords, because they are somewhat justified in saying the housing authority is a mess and I don't want to be in business with them. And so you've got to be able to take the wind out of that argument. That can't be true. Your housing authority can't be a mess. And so you're going to have to talk about some strategic system goals, right? And what does that look like? And that takes us into the next piece that Marla and I wanted to talk to you guys about, which is, getting the financial resources, the human resources, other things that are needed, and how you start this planning process and who's missing. And so one hard piece that you have that we did is you need to review your previous plans, your previous initiatives. You're not going to be as fortunate as New Orleans was. There was a lot of plans for us to deal with because we were almost 10 years out after Katrina, right? So after Katrina, there were a lot of initiatives. A lot of people spent money on this. You guys are going to have, but you are going to have processes like the For Everyone Home and the City Council Anti-Displacement Agenda. And so you're going to need to spend some time. You've got your housing authorities. Your housing authority does everybody know that the housing authorities, your PHAs, have to do annual plans? So y'all need to be looking at that. And what are they telling everybody? The HUD is probably ignoring it, but what are they telling people that they want to do, and engaging with them? Your CPC, your City Planning Commission, what's your master plan process, right? What's their CZO, their zoning process. You need to be talking about those. So you want to get all of those assembled and reviewed. And this is the part where we got to start talking about staffing and infrastructure and who's going to be doing what, right? Marla and her team
I don't want to interrupt you, but I know you use those are like kind of the stuff for New Orleans. Could you speak more to those who the PHA and the CPC to see what that would be equivocal to us?
Sure. So your housing authority that's simple. What's the name of it again, Marla?
HAWS, yeah, the Housing Authority of Winston-Salem. So HAWS does an annual plan. So that's the thing there, HAWS.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. And then CPC,
your planning.
And we have someone from the planning department on our call who's going to be joining us, and Kirk can speak to, it's kind of like our comprehensive plan, if I'm not mistaken, but Kirk, I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Marla. That would be our comprehensive plan, which most of you all are familiar with that. That's the Legacy 2030 plan currently, and that was adopted by council back in 2012, 2013. And we're actually going to be starting to update that in the next year or so and make sure that includes some of these same topics that we've been talking about today. So definitely we'll have kind of that consistency there.
That's right. That's what you want to make sure that, one, what the comprehensive plan has already committed to, you're aligning with. And again, Kirk just offered this, there's an opportunity to influence changes based on what you came out of it. And that's the kind of, I wanted to make sure that you guys had all of those pieces connected. But there's going to need some internal support for standing that up. And Marla and her team are going to need some additional resources. And again, those can be in the form of community partners. Some people are going to be doing this already, right? And so it's part of it making sure that you have an alignment piece. So you're going to start in October, and what we want to come out of that with is a timeline that lets you guys put everything together, organize it, and you start looking at what the financial costs are going to be, so you can start talking about fundraising for some of those pieces. Some of the resources are here already, but what's missing? What else does Marla and her team need to execute this? What does Kirk need, right? Kirk, as you guys might be looking at comprehensive. The recommendation might be that, just as you guys are already working with grounded solutions. So what about inclusionary housing, right? So what does that need? That meaning that the funding to examine that may need to go to the planning department so that they can properly contextualize the results of any kind of report and share it with the larger group.
And Andrenika, that's a good point. I'll just, not to interrupt, but I do want to say that equity is actually probably going to be the overarching theme of our next comp plan. We haven't really considered some of these concepts as much in the past. We were more kind of land use oriented just because that's where the community was. But we certainly have seen some of these same trends that Marla and her staff have seen. And we've really kind of built up that relationship over the last few years and want to have a lot of cross collaboration, both in Marla's plan, but also in the new comp plan as well. So you're spot on.
Yep.
And we also had, Andrenika, we have a housing study and needs assessment. I think that's the one you spoke about earlier, the enterprise did. So
right.
We have that as a guide in terms of information and some data, although it now needs updating. But then we also have, and this kind of cross-pollinates again with planning, the vacant and abandoned and deteriorated properties report from the Center for Community Progress. So that's now 2 years old, just about. So I think we've got some good stuff to start with. Like I said, some of our data needs updating. Right. I think for everyone home, which is that council anti-displacement agenda, that is the most current work that has some data, but that comprehensive data probably needs updating. And now that we've had the census, updating our data is even more important.
Mm-hmm. All right. Do we have any other reports that I'm missing on here? We want to make sure, and we should check, Marla, with your housing finance agency. They're going to have a needs assessment plan. What's it called again?
Which one?
Your housing finance agency, the state one.
Oh, North Carolina Housing Finance Agency.
Okay. Yeah. They're going to have a needs assessment plan. I mean, a needs assessment that includes Winston-Salem, regardless of whether or not you guys like it. That's what's on the books. And so you want to know who's talking about your issue. Okay. Let's see. And you don't have a local finance authority, do you?
Mm-mm. No.
Okay. Housing finance agency. And
we might want to get there soon, because there's been a lot of talk about maybe creating a local housing trust fund. So, you know, it would be nice if there was a place for that to get some, I don't know if I say just airtime, for lack of a better word right now, as part of this plan. You know, we do have a need for something that's the equivalent probably of a local housing finance agency. I know that's a huge undertaking, but I think the closest thing for that right now might be the conversations, at least around a trust fund.
Okay.
Marla, do you know, and I'm wondering, I probably need checking, I don't know, John, if you know better as well. But I'm just wondering if that kind of that local kind of housing finance agency would require a decentralization of the work at the state level, just because right now, most things, John, if I'm not mistaken with them, it comes down to county by county, how they hand out those resources. So I wonder why you couldn't end up with, you know, a county by county kind of local. But I think that may end up, I'm just wondering what it takes to do that. That may take actual legislative action because the legislator created the Housing Finance Agency.
Right.
So,
I think you're right.
And the other thing with that, though, when you say county by county, now you're talking about Forsyth County. And what about that dance in that relationship, right? Just saying.
Yeah.
True.
Marla, I was wondering, is there any current report or plans from Housing Matters? And I noted that we didn't say anything about homelessness, which could be growing, you know, as a result of COVID.
You don't have to frame foot, it is.
Well,
Yeah.
so we didn't specifically call it out. I look at it as, number one, part of that increased accessibility piece and the special needs. You know, because at its core, the whole issue around homelessness is a lack of housing that's affordable, right? And so my hope is, and there's an agenda item on here too, where I talk about the assessment of the continuum of care. My hope is that whatever comes out of this assessment of the COC and any planning that happens, like in the RFP that we put out, we specifically called out that the consultant would have to engage in this process as well, so that anything around homelessness has a place in this overarching plan, because it's about housing. And so housing with services. So it should not be a standalone. It needs to find a home, no pun intended, here in this plan.
Question.
So, I think what Paula was asking too is does your continuum, does your COC have a plan that they are currently working on?
Yes, but that's why we just, we'll be interviewing consultants next week to do an assessment of the whole COC and its plan and make recommendations for.
So, but that's happening. So COC assessment is happening. That should be included in this because that your point is to align it. But do they have a current?
It's not a community plan, in my opinion. It's not a plan derived by community to solve the issues.
That's right.
Okay, so they're doing the work, which happens a lot. Okay, COC assessment.
But we
and what's your continuum of care called again?
And so under goals, then should we, under where we did the special needs, should we put homelessness in there as well? I mean,
I think I went back and added them.
You added it, okay.
So I had a question. This is a question I had in terms of with our goals and our evaluations of things, because the question around homelessness maybe raise a question of how do we make sure in our work we're doing the review of these plans, but also review of existing policies that may negatively impact the creation of these housing. And I take, for instance, one thing about homelessness, the city probably 10 years ago put in place essentially a ban on rooming houses. And there wasn't a creation of, the zoning, in my opinion, is restricted to create where they don't exist at all, even though they can exist in very, very stringent areas. But when you think about homelessness and folks at very, very low incomes, that some rooming houses were the only places that they could actually afford to live, or you look at certain permanent supportive housing things, there's some rules in place that prevent that type of accessible housing. So how do we bake in that type of evaluation in our conversation?
I agree with you, Darren, because I had that thought too, that we should probably look at all of these policies through a racial equity lens.
So that is, so then that was one thing here. I think you guys should add that as one of your goals. An examination of existing policies through a racial equity lens, and
I agree.
with the mindset of achieving the other goals.
I agree.
Okay.
And Donna's also mentioned transportation, because, that can have an impact on affordability, especially from the home ownership side. We used to hear that phrase, you drive until you qualify, right? But even in terms of people's ability to have access to services and jobs and things of that nature, transportation is going to be a huge piece, I think. I agree with Donna raising that point.
Can we tie that into 5?
So we talk about, sometimes what we've done is we put transportation inside of sustainable design and infrastructure, but that doesn't mean that you guys have to. One thing that we struggled with, and this is around the affordability conversation that you guys had, was housing plus transportation is really the core cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a really great way to quantify transportation so that you could say, okay, this person, their housing is affordable because where it's situated or the transportation cost, how much they're paying for it and where it's situated and how that impacts the transportation costs can be quantified. But that is the magic number, right? That's the magic number.
So there was, and this might be added to our things to research or to review. I want to say it was 8 or 10 years ago, the Triad Regional Council, PTRC, did a regional housing and transportation study that covered the entire, it wasn't just Winston-Salem, it was Greensboro, it was the entire region, and looked at, if I remember correctly, I think it looked at affordability and through the transportation plus housing lens. So I think the research is already out there, and they, some of you guys are familiar with Stephen Sills from UNC Greensboro.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he did. I think he led some of that original research. So I'll see if I can dig it up. I mean, it would definitely need to be updated, but at least it would give us a framework.
It would be there.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you've got a comprehensive transportation plan. So that's good. What's it called again, John?
It was done by the Piedmont Triad Regional Council, I think, PTRC.
PTRC, yeah.
Yeah.
PTRC. We'll know what it is. We'll spell it out for you later.
Okay. Okay. And I want to make sure that, let's see, I want to make sure we go back to this. Do you guys, we talked about transportation. I don't want to sweep it under the rug. Do you want it to be its own goal, or do you want it to be highlighted and make sure we're calling it out in, because we could add transportation. So we could say encourage innovative and sustainable design in housing, transportation, and infrastructure. Or
yeah,
okay.
I think that works right there in number 5.
Okay.
All right, I found it. It's called the, sorry if I'm interrupting, Piedmont Together. The Piedmont Together Housing Report is what I think it ended up being called. It was a multi-year process that they did it. Oh, well, I've got a PDF that I haven't even opened it yet, but Marla, should I just send it to you?
Sure, that's fine. And I can disseminate it to everybody and drop it into our OneDrive file.
So as you can see, so you've got a lot of documents that have to be distilled, and there's probably more. We're gonna do a kick the tires, and we want to make sure that everybody's looking for everything. And these all need to be distilled, and make sure that you guys have access to them as just a resource. And what are to Derwin's point, what are the landmines that are already out there? Right, the things that you go moving along and you're like, oh crud, we can't do that because this is already in place. So again, that kind of analysis, and that talks about the structure and the financial resource. So what we want to make sure you guys come out of with in October is a roadmap. And again, you're going to still tweak it, but drilling these all down, having some idea of what that's going to take to even get even more deep information, and then who the resources need to be allocated to, and that you guys would come out of this with a budget that is tied to your coalition structure, which is going to be very important. So we've got to, you guys are going to be somewhat, putting this, we got to put this together. And you guys are going to have to make some decisions and some recommendations on what you're willing to do. And then also Marla is going to have to go out and find some of these additional resources. We're going to help her with that. There's some money that we hope is going to be coming to help pay for all of this. But we want you all to come up with the plan, right? The comprehensive strategy, put the budget together to go along with it to do what you need to do, and then figure out how you finance it. And that'll also impact some of the planning, right? If some of the money isn't available immediately, that means certain things are going to have to be delayed or just put at a different place on the timeline. So, but I do want to alert everybody that is going to be I think everybody really enjoyed talking about the housing piece and thinking about the systems, but there is going to be some less fun work, which is going to be putting structure to this and figuring out how you guys pay for it. And that's not as much fun. Just gotta warn you up front. So Marla, I know we were supposed to wrap up 30 minutes ago, but that was the last piece that I had. And we're also gonna, this is one more thing, the community engagement piece is going to be also something that we're going to talk about in October, which is, so I want to keep the structure very similar to this talk. We talk more about the goals and the previous plans. We're going to spend a good chunk of time on the structure, and then go back to what I think is going to be fun, or challenging at least, community engagement, right? We've already heard some of these issues raised today. We talked about racial equity. We're also going to recommend that we did this before, where we would recommend that we train people to talk about the work. I'm going to recommend that you guys also have those, that you all go through a racial equity conversation. Most of you have already done this, but that you do one together that centers housing, and then you get volunteers, like some of the community people you're going to get to participate and talk about that they also do that as well. Go ahead, Paula.
Just you as you talk about community engagement, I was just thinking, I mean, is that, we didn't establish that as a goal. So is that just understood? Or
yeah, it is understood, but you're right, Paula. It might behoove us to put it in as a goal, because
so that we are intentional about that.
Yeah, let's go back to that. Hold on, I still have y'all's goals up. So let's see. We might want to have it as its own goal. That could be at the top. Develop a plan. That could be the first one. Is develop a plan, develop a housing plan that is community rooted, and let's start there. Develop a comprehensive housing plan, and it might not even be a goal. It might be your mission statement. That might be what ends up happening, but it.
But we don't want it to get lost. I mean,
That's right. And again, it says preliminary. You guys are going to finalize this. We want to throw everything at this and spend some time reorganizing it in October. That centers communities' needs and engages them in a long-term process to ensure that the people of Winston-Salem Oops. Wait, let's see. That provides housing opportunities for the people. What do y'all think of that?
Process to ensure. Wait a minute, there's a couple extra words.
That provides.
Okay.
Yeah.
That provides, okay. Long term to ensure.
It's supposed to be that, yeah.
Process. That provides.
So development of a comprehensive plan that centers communities' needs and engages them in a long-term process.
To provide. Yeah.
Long-term process to provide.
Mm-hmm.
And we can tweak that a little bit more. This, I think, gets to the intentions that you guys made. I think it needs to be wordsmithed a little bit more, but it's clear that you want to center communities' needs and you want to work with them on this.
Long term.
Long term. That's the two things. But I think it could stand being wordsmithed a lot more.
Yeah, I think it sounds good. I think it captures the intent there too. And I know we're not on the hows of these things yet, but one thought, Paula, and the others that just in this as we begin to even think about the conversation ahead, and even if we were going to have dialogue with folks in October with any outside groups, I wonder the value of inviting other housing advocacy leadership to a table prior to going out to the large community. And the reason I say that is that it is the validity of them being at the table. So it's not, as much as I think Mark about this is not, this doesn't need to be a city thing. Being able to have those folks coming to the table ahead of time and saying, hey, we're preparing to go to community. You all are part of the grassroots community. Is our plan to even engage community thus far? Are we walking the right page and we need your help to come out to the folks to have this conversation?
Mm-hmm.
Does that, am I off on that?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, no, I think having them be there, at least, I know we talked about them being there on the second day. So yeah, that could be something that you're adding, not just community leaders, but you're adding advocates.
So that would be on the 16th, that work.
Right.
Okay. And I guess that was the question for me on that. And if we're moving to that in terms of I get the 15th, then do we have a frame of the sense of what that 16th would look like? Like what are we looking forward to on that 16th?
Yeah, I think that's something we need to kind of hash out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we might have to, have a series of emails back and forth, or maybe a subcommittee of the whole to maybe kind of do some of this in between work, and also get some guidance from Andrenika, so that we can get invitations out in a reasonable time, find a location, because we got a little work to do on that front. We might want to talk about that. How do we take this next step? As we go through the rest of the agenda.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Okay. Andrenika, this has been great.
Good.
Yeah. I think it's a good place to start. Like I said, these are preliminary. We wordsmith, we refine, and even with that, some of that work we're talking about in October, where we might bring some of the other people to the table, that could even help with some of the further refinement and other things that we have to do.
Yep.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time. I know obviously you and I'll follow up. We got to take care of the arrangements and all of that kind of stuff and look at the notes. But any parting words of wisdom or anything you have for us?
So yeah, so you guys are you're on the right path. It's going to be exciting. And I think you guys are really engaged around this and really committed to it, which is really good. And all I want to keep saying is, like I told Joe before he left, is that I want to make sure that you guys keep your eyes on the prize and remember that this is possible, right? It's going to be hard. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it and pretend that it's not going to be difficult. I noticed that people got a little not nervous, but the energy shifted when we started talking about bringing the advocates in. And no one said no, but I felt like, and maybe I'm projecting, I felt like somebody wanted to say no. Do we want to bring them? And and you know that that's not the right thing to do, that they need to be a part of the conversation, but that they do add complexity to this, right? And they're not necessarily going to make it easier, but they are going to make it better. You are going to make this better. Community is going to make this better. And a group of people having this conversation in a room by themselves, no matter how well-intentioned, no matter how thoughtful, no matter how smart, is not going to get it done. So you're headed in the right direction. I'm going to always, as supporting Marla and supporting you guys through this process, and encouraging you guys, because remember, New Orleans desperately needs Winston-Salem to be successful at this because it'll help us with our success. The more people who are doing this, it helps all of us, because there are federal opportunities that are only going to be made better if more people are like, oh yeah, all of these places have done their plans. They know what they're doing. They're dealing with the disabling environment. They're dealing with racial equity. They're dealing with the systemic challenges. Let's make those investments. And we've seen that. We've seen what happens when you get all the federal resources. The best example we have of this is what's happening with the COVID rental assistance across the country, right? That is, we all always like to complain about the federal government. Here is the federal government providing as much money as possible for this issue, and state and local officials are fumbling the bag. And it's because they don't have this kind of plan. They don't have this kind of strategy. New Orleans is doing better than the rest of the state because we have this kind of infrastructure, but Louisiana is struggling with this. And so are a lot of other places. And so, and we learned this lesson with Katrina. You could get all the money that you could ever need to solve a problem and still mess it up because you don't have a plan. So you guys are going to be ahead of the game. You're going to have the plan, and then you're going to go get the money, and then it's going to be great. It's going to be perfect, right?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dervin. Anything else? Because I know we do have a couple of items we need to hit, and we've got 15 minutes.
Yep. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Yeah, I'm going to go. Yeah, no problem. Thank you, guys.
All right. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Right, bye-bye.
Bye. Whew. All right.
Yeah. Good work. So with that, Marla, on the next few items, just action on coalition structure.
Yeah, I don't know that we've got enough folks still at the table to have that conversation. I know that was one of the things Ryan, suggested that we kind of come back to and discuss more. And I think maybe in our next session, maybe it might make more sense because, to the extent we've got a lot of work to do with this plan, it is the need maybe right now, how do we structure ourselves as a coalition to take on pieces of the work. And so I know that the city attorney said that those 3 working groups that were in the resolution are required. We're free to have additional ones. And so I think that we might just really want to decide, maybe not today, but next time potentially, what might some of these other groups look like that can help support this work that we're doing. And
is there?
What are those 3 working groups? Are those the ones that we have in the? Okay.
The long-term planning, housing access, and I think it was on, the other one was on supply.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that's what you were talking about.
I was gonna say, Marla, maybe if we can get with Andrenika to let her know, or to say at the, I guess as we're closing at the end of our time together in October, that, and we're assigning, like, where does this live within the coalition work? Then, okay, this committee is, now that we got through this piece, this is the work you got to do. And then once we start assigning, it may become clear where we have gaps in terms of, well, this really doesn't fit in this working group. We need another working group in this area kind of to assign, like what you were saying. But I think if we build it in there, we can make sure we work it out.
Right, because some of it may reside or needs to be held by somebody outside of the coalition completely.
Right.
So we have to start thinking about who are our potential partners, through this whole process. Because when we get on the back end of it and you start to talk about implementation, parts of this are going to have to be held by somebody else. Because you guys are a volunteer group, right? Advisory group. We're staff, but there's a lot of work that's going to have to be held in other places. So we probably need to start kind of creating our own little list and bring those to the table also next month of who might some of our potential partners might be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
So if you'd like, I can do a couple of quick updates. I have the first item I have on here is developments approved or in progress. So over the last few months, the council has, of course, approved investing into Whitaker Park for some lofts and apartments there. Just this week, they approved support for what's called Rams Point on Martin Luther King. Let's see, it's like I had the list and it just left me. Essex Place, which is off of Kester Mill Road, it's nearly completed with construction, but they had some gap that they came to the city and asked to help with, and it's 100% affordable. And then, we're still hoping to move forward with the build out of Ridgewood, and that's all home ownership. Part of the issue for us is staff capacity, and that'll be the last item. So they're kind of interrelated in terms of some of the things we're looking at doing to build capacity of the staff. And then we're still needing to do an environmental review of some property on Northwest Boulevard that we're hoping to develop into some permanent supportive housing, approximately 10 units or so. It's to be determined based on what comes back with the environmental review and how much space is really developable on that location. Those are the only projects right now. I asked staff earlier in the week if we had anything coming up, so that we would be prepared to submit information to council for its October meeting. And we don't have anything that's kind of on the hopper. So those are probably the four biggest things: the permanent supportive housing, Ridgewood, Whitaker Lofts, and Rams Point. I think I don't know that if at any point there'll be any investment we're requested of for Metropolitan Village. Their primary request had been around TIF. They wanted a tax rebate or a TIF, which council does not generally support. And so they've asked for some infrastructure assistance. Of course, that's outside of our department because they've not asked for any actual cash that we would be putting into a deal. And I don't know where that stands currently, but that is something that the city may, I know the city's going to do the infrastructure right there for the block where the housing is located. But the whole 5th Street part that they are looking at that needs to be developed, The city is taking care of Fifth Street, but I think there's some additional infrastructure that they need inside the project and on some side streets. And the Fifth Street money is just for Fifth Street. So I'm not sure what their next steps are in terms of filling their gap, but I know they're hoping to move that along in the next few months. As it relates, though, to staff capacity, it was almost a year ago that April left us, and she was our housing programs manager and the staff person who had been facilitating these meetings. That position is going to be reposted either today or tomorrow. We had posted after she left, but the applicant pool, we just didn't quite see the skill sets that we needed. So we're getting ready to repost that. And then we've also, we've gotten approval to add and create a new position, which is going to be called a housing development manager. Because one of the things that the city is looking to do is to try to acquire as much property as we can so that we can really play a greater role in making sure that the kinds of units we need are actually developed. We need a person who can then run point on those development projects. The idea, like what we're going to do for Ridgewood and even for the permanent supportive housing on Northwest Boulevard, is the city will put out an RFP for developers. And part of what we put into the deal is the land and potentially some gap money depending on availability of any sources. So we will need a staff person whose primary job is to create the RFPs, manage that process, do the project management for those developments that the city sponsors. So we are hoping that that position will be posted within the next couple of weeks as well. We know that based on the funding that's coming from the federal government, we as a staff are going to just have to beef up our capacity, because a lot of those dollars are going to come through this department, and we're going to have to be able to manage that flow. So that's why I went to management to ask to create the development position, but we will also be creating an assistant director in community development. So that person would then be over anything that's development related and our housing programs. So under that umbrella would be the housing programs manager, which you're familiar with already, the new housing development manager, and then our choice neighborhoods initiative will come under that position as well. And then on the second side will be all things land. So enforcement. So that's where our our code enforcement work will land. But also, if you'll recall, one of the outcomes of For Everyone Home was an action plan around creating a land bank. And so that initial work around creating the land bank will sit on that side of the department. Obviously, there's going to be some interaction, because to the extent with the land bank, we bring properties in, we get them prepared to move them over to the housing development management side for the RFPs for the development. So there'll be that interrelatedness, but we've got to have somebody who can kind of lead that work around code enforcement and potential land banking work. The land bank is going to take a while to actually develop it, but I think there'll be some opportunities to still do some targeted acquisition, and council is looking at a particular parcel right now to potentially acquire, and I think an offer will be put on that potential property soon. So we're starting some of the work without the formal land bank being in place, because it takes a while to do that, but we're working towards that goal. At the end of the day, we don't know where the land bank will actually sit. Will it be its own entity within city government? Will it be a part of this department, part of our real estate department? So there are a lot of details that we'll have to work out. How will it be funded? Will it only deal with residential properties, or will it deal with potentially some commercial properties from an economic development standpoint? And could maybe the sale of some of those properties on the market help to fund the work of the land bank. So there's a lot of detail that we have to do. And so we've just started the research on that. So in a nutshell, we're looking at how we reconfigure the way we're structured. How do we bring on the additional staffing to manage this work? We just heard from HUD that we're going to get around close to $5 million or so of home money. That's part of the American Rescue Plan. There's been a discussion by the council that approximately $20 million of the American Rescue Plan money might go into housing. There's a chance that in this reconciliation bill that Congress is working on now, there may be more resources for housing, as well as potentially some resources around housing and transportation through the infrastructure bill. So this is, as people have said, that once in a generation opportunity for resources. And so we would rather get ourselves positioned to respond or act really when the money starts to flow, rather than trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to do? Who do we need to have in place to get the work done? So so when that housing development manager comes on, like I said, one of the first things they'll be focused on is Ridgewood. And if we finally get the go ahead to do the permanent supportive housing, because we still have a couple of more steps outside of the environmental review. Once we get the go ahead, if we do, then those will be the first couple of projects while we continue to find out about other development opportunities through acquisition.
Two quick questions, Marla. Is land bank and land trust synonymous?
No.
Okay, that's the first question. And the second one, in terms of the 20 million that could go toward the Housing Development Fund, that would be what portion of what's actually needed? Do we know what the total amount, if we were to be able to produce the number of units that, I guess, that are needed, you know, that's been defined, but that 20 million would be what portion of that?
We don't know. Let me put it like this. I'll say two things. One, that's a drop in the bucket. And a classic example is this. You look at Choice Neighborhoods. That's a $30 million grant for one location, right?
Right. And that's not even enough for that location, right?
Right. That's only a piece of it. So clearly we'll need far more resources and they'll need to be leveraged, right? So I think part of what will happen as we walk through this plan is, you know, hopefully, and you know, we'll see as we work more with Andrenika, you know, if we are able, for instance, to set some annual production and preservation targets in terms of the number of units, then you can start to do the math in terms of about how much money do we need. And see, by us doing RFPs for developers, our land and or money would help to bring all of that to bear. So it's not as though the money will fund the entire cost of a development, but it's intended to sweeten the pot, if you will, for developers to come and provide us what we say we need, rather than us hoping that somebody who comes to us saying they have a need for our gap money, hoping that they'll give us a few of the units we need. Because right now, you know, we are hoping people come to us to say they'll develop, and then we just kind of have to negotiate 10 units, 20 units out of however many they're doing. And we'll never meet the need that we have that was shown in that housing study and needs assessment.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, I know that was a mouthful in a hurry. But anything else I can maybe address? I know we're at time. And sounds like we got a lot of work to do between now and October 15th too.
Yeah, and that's all I was going to say in terms of just wondering what we need to do between now and then, and just knowing the load that you all have, and then the things that from the coalition side of things that we should be doing here and working through to make sure that we get to where we need to be before we get back together. Just wondering.
Yeah, let me kind of think about it because it is a lot. And there may be, and I'll get those notes that we came up with, those preliminary goals. I'll get those out to everybody. Hopefully, if not later this afternoon, maybe Monday. And maybe it's a situation where folks can kind of say, look, I kind of want to work in this area to kind of help bring this along in whatever way. Maybe if we can start like that, that might be the easiest way to kind of get ourselves ready. And then we'll still have to figure out who might we be inviting to the table next month. And I'll look to you guys for a lot of that guidance, as well as we got to find a place. So, if you have any recommendations on a location, let me know. And we'll, as a staff, kind of consider what our options are on that as well, keeping social distancing and everything else in mind.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Are we good?
Yeah. Do you want to maybe, just from a time, maybe, I don't know, in the next week, maybe you and I just circle around just so we can, then again, just back with that same thing. So there's some things I need to work with Coalition on directly to help facilitate that we can pass those also. Because like I said, I'll make myself available as much as we need just to help make sure we're facilitating. And again, not throwing everything on you all to try to figure out. So.
Thank you. Because I'm actually down and well, not down, I'm out a week in between today and then. So yeah, we'll definitely need this to be a total team process.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
All right, very good. Well, I'll look for us to figure out when we can connect.
Okay.
All right, great. Thank y'all. This was a great conversation today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Really rich.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you all for your time and your commitment, and we'll keep it moving.
All right. Appreciate everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.